An active-duty Navy SEAL was driving through a violent mountain hurricane when he suddenly slammed the brakes. In the middle of the flooded road, he saw him. A mud-soaked German shepherd, ears flattened, body tense, refusing to move. What the soldier found at the end of that dog's trail would uncover a truth he was completely unprepared for. And what the woman trapped inside the crushed cabin had endured will break your heart. But her courage and the bond she formed with a dog named Max might just restore your faith in miracles. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below and subscribe. The Smoky Mountains were drowning under a merciless torrential downpour. Black skies bled into the jagged horizon as howling winds violently whipped ancient pines, transforming the usually serene Tennessee landscape into an unforgiving, chaotic expanse of rushing water. John gripped the steering wheel of his modified tactical truck, his knuckles white against the worn leather. As an active-duty Navy SEAL, he was accustomed to operating in the world's most hostile environments. Yet the tempest raging outside mirrored the turbulent storm within his own mind. He was a man carved from granite, standing at 6'2", with a rugged, sharply angled jawline obscured by a meticulously kept, dark shadow of a beard. His piercing steel-gray eyes, usually sharp and calculating, now carried the heavy, haunting weight of unresolved grief. The recent loss of his older brother, Michael, had fractured something deep within his stoic exterior, replacing his natural camaraderie with a quiet, isolating intensity. John had taken this leave of absence searching for solace, hoping the isolation would quiet the relentless ghosts of guilt that whispered he should have been there to save him. The winding asphalt of the mountain pass had become a treacherous river of mud and debris. Branches and loose stones cascaded down the steep embankments, threatening to sweep any unsuspecting traveler into the abyss below. John's military instincts kicked into high gear, his body tensing with hypervigilance as he navigated the blinding hairpin turns. Every muscle in his broad, athletically built frame was coiled, reacting to the shifting terrain with practiced precision. He had survived intense firefights and covert extractions across the globe, yet there was something profoundly humbling about fighting the raw, unbridled fury of Mother Nature. The truck's headlights cut through the absolute darkness like dull knives, revealing only a few feet of the flooded road ahead. He considered turning back toward the nearest outpost, but a stubborn, inexplicable urge pushed his heavy boot down on the accelerator. It was as if the mountain itself was challenging his resolve, testing whether the legendary endurance of a SEAL could withstand the crushing weight of both physical exhaustion and his own profound emotional devastation. Suddenly, the high beams illuminated a dark, solid shape standing firmly in the center of the flooded road. John slammed on the brakes, the heavy tires hydroplaning momentarily, before halting mere inches from the obstacle. Through the rain-slicked windshield, he saw a massive German shepherd. The dog, a magnificent specimen of the breed, appearing to be around 4 years old, possessed a thick, classic black and tan coat that was now entirely matted and heavily soaked with dark mountain mud. His powerful muscular frame trembled visibly against the biting wind, yet he adamantly refused to yield a single inch of ground. The canine's large ears were pinned back against his skull, and his sharp, highly intelligent amber eyes were wide, with a frantic, undeniable desperation. This was not a wild, aggressive beast, nor a lost pet wandering aimlessly. This was a highly trained creature, exhibiting a distinct, purposeful distress. The dog's posture was rigid, exuding a remarkable blend of visceral fear and fiercely protective courage that instantly commanded the grieving soldier's complete and undivided attention. Rather than retreating from the idling, roaring engine of the massive truck, the brave shepherd stepped closer to the bumper and let out a deep, guttural bark that somehow pierced clearly through the howling gale. John rolled down his window, instantly allowing the freezing, horizontal rain to lash fiercely against his face, stinging his skin like tiny, icy needles. "Move, buddy! Get out of the road!" John commanded, his deep, authoritative baritone projecting outward into the storm. But the dog merely dug his heavy, mud-caked paws deeper into the surging current sweeping across the asphalt. The shepherd let out another commanding bark, then abruptly pivoted, trotting a few deliberate paces toward the treacherous, pitch-black tree line, before turning his massive head back to lock eyes with the confused driver. The dog repeated this specific motion, stepping toward the flooded forest and looking back, creating a clear, desperate pantomime. John's heart rate accelerated as his tactical training took over. He instantly recognized the complex behavior of a working dog actively trying to alert a human to a critical, life-threatening situation. A profound realization washed over John, momentarily silencing the chaotic storm of grief that had been raging in his chest for weeks. He had been drowning in the agonizing, suffocating helplessness of being utterly unable to save his own brother when it mattered most. Now, staring into the pleading amber eyes of this exhausted, mud-soaked animal, he felt a sudden electric surge of absolute purpose. Someone out there in the dark, churning wilderness was in mortal danger, and this incredibly resilient dog was their final, desperate lifeline. The heavy, paralyzing burden of his personal sorrow seamlessly transformed into the sharp, hyper-focused adrenaline of a high-stakes rescue mission. Without allowing himself another second of hesitation or doubt, John firmly killed the truck's engine and swiftly grabbed his waterproof, tactical, heavy-duty flashlight and a compact medical trauma kit from the passenger's seat. He shoved open the heavy metal door, bravely stepping out into the ankle-deep, freezing torrent that immediately threatened to sweep his legs out from under him. The freezing wind immediately battered against his imposing, muscular frame, but his sharp jaw set with an unwavering, unbreakable determination. John looked down at the shivering German shepherd, who was watching him intently through the sheets of rain. He gave the animal a single firm nod, solidifying an unspoken, sacred pact between the grieving, battle-hardened soldier and the remarkably loyal, desperate canine guardian. "All right, lead the way," John shouted over the deafening roar of the raging tempest, his voice carrying the commanding tone of a man ready to go to war. As if understanding the exact weight and promise of those words, the dog immediately sprang into frantic action. The shepherd plunged fearlessly into the dense, unforgiving underbrush, his powerful hind legs driving through the thick, sucking mud and dangerously tangled, hidden roots. John followed closely behind, his flashlight carving a narrow, erratic tunnel of stark white light through the suffocating, oppressive darkness of the flooded forest. The icy rain battered them relentlessly from all sides, and the rapidly rising floodwaters tugged viciously at John's heavy combat boots, actively attempting to drag them both down into the murky depths. The terrain grew steeper and more treacherous with every step, the earth crumbling beneath their weight as the storm unleashed its full, unmitigated wrath upon the mountain. Yet, completely driven by the dog's relentless, punishing pace and the newly reawakened fire burning brightly within his own deeply scarred soul, the Navy SEAL pushed himself harder. He ignored the biting cold and the burning fatigue in his lungs, his mind entirely locked onto the mission ahead. They moved as a unified team through the catastrophic landscape, plunging deeper into the perilous, unknown depths of the Smoky Mountains. John did not know what kind of tragedy or miracle awaited them at the end of this dark trail, but for the first time since his brother's death, he felt truly alive and ready to fight. The relentless downpour transformed the Appalachian wilderness into a churning nightmare of mud and splintered wood. But John forged ahead, his eyes fixed on the steadfast silhouette of the German shepherd. Max moved with an almost supernatural certainty, navigating the treacherous, washed-out trails by memory and scent, despite the chaotic winds threatening to toss them into the gorge below. John's heavy combat boots sank deep into the mire, his muscles burning as he hoisted himself over uprooted trees, marveling at the dog's relentless drive. This was not a random wandering. The animal was executing a deliberate, highly calculated extraction route. The freezing rain lashed against John's tactical gear, testing the limits of his physical endurance. But the seasoned Navy SEAL pushed the pain aside, fueled by the adrenaline of a rescue mission. Every time John's pace slowed, Max would pause, look back with those piercing amber eyes, and let out an urgent, low whine, urging the soldier forward into the pitch-black maw of the flooded forest. After nearly a mile of grueling vertical ascent through the drowning woods, the erratic beam of John's tactical flashlight caught the jagged edges of a catastrophic structural collapse. Nestled dangerously close to an overflowing creek was a secluded, ancient log cabin, its entire right wing utterly obliterated by a massive, centuries-old pine tree that had snapped under the storm's fury. The enormous trunk had crushed the heavy timber roof like brittle twigs, creating a deadly maze of splintered wood, twisted metal, and rushing water. John's heart hammered against his ribs as he assessed the grim scene. The structural integrity was compromised, and the foundation was slowly sliding toward the rising floodwaters. Without a second thought, he squeezed his broad shoulders through a dangerously narrow gap beneath the fallen tree trunk, ignoring the sharp splinters tearing at his jacket. Max scrambled in right beside him, whining frantically as he immediately darted toward the darkest corner of the ruined living room, leading John straight to the heart of the disaster. The flashlight beam swept across the wreckage and froze on a figure huddled beneath the crushing weight of a collapsed support beam, instantly sending a shockwave of disbelief through John's entire body. It was Sarah, his late brother Michael's widow. She was a woman known for her fierce independence and quiet elegance, typically possessing a vibrant, warm complexion and striking auburn hair that always seemed to catch the sunlight. Now her pale skin was ghostly white and smeared with dark mud, her usually bright emerald eyes half closed in agonizing pain, and her slender, yet remarkably resilient frame shivering violently in the freezing dampness. Around her lay the astonishing evidence of Max's tireless devotion. The brilliant German Shepherd had aggressively torn apart a foam mattress, dragging the heavy chunks to insulate Sarah's body from the freezing floorboards, and a bright red wilderness first aid kit had been dragged from a distant shelf and placed meticulously by her trembling hand. Max immediately curled his wet body around her upper torso, whimpering softly as he desperately tried to share his remaining body heat with his injured mistress. Snapping out of his momentary paralysis, John dropped to his knees, his military medical training instantly overriding his personal shock. "Sarah, stay with me. I've got you," he commanded softly, swiftly opening the first aid kit Max had retrieved. He quickly assessed her lower body. Her right leg was pinned beneath a heavy secondary timber, resulting in a severe crush injury that required immediate stabilization to prevent further shock. Working with surgical precision in the dim, flickering light, John applied a makeshift splint and wrapped her in his own dry thermal emergency blanket, effectively sealing out the deadly cold. Sarah's eyelids fluttered open, her gaze struggling to focus before finally locking onto John's familiar face. A weak, trembling smile cracked her pale lips as she whispered his name, a mix of profound relief and heartbreaking sorrow echoing in the cramped, freezing space. She had ventured to this remote cabin, Michael's old hunting retreat, for a specific, deeply personal reason, but the tempest had trapped her, leaving her entirely dependent on the heroic instincts of her loyal dog. 10 miles down the mountain, the atmosphere inside the Smoky Mountain Ranger Station was equally tense, though sheltered from the immediate freezing rain. David, the veteran station chief, paced the floorboards with a heavy, restless stride. He was a powerfully built man in his late 50s, bearing a rugged, deeply weathered face framed by a thick, salt-and-pepper beard. A tragic avalanche rescue failure a decade ago had left him with a permanent limp and a fierce, uncompromising protective streak over his jurisdiction. He was a man who refused to let the mountain claim another soul under his watch. Beside him sat Emily, the late shift dispatcher, a brilliant, pragmatic woman in her late 20s, with fiery red hair pulled into a tight, no-nonsense bun, and sharp hazel eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses. She was frantically monitoring the crackling emergency frequencies, her fingers flying across the glowing dispatch console as the storm wreaked havoc on the county's communication infrastructure, rendering most of their high-tech equipment temporarily useless. Suddenly, a sharp, rhythmic burst of static broke through the white noise on Emily's primary receiver. She pressed her headset tightly against her ear, her eyes widening as she isolated the frequency. "Chief, I've got a manual SOS signal. It's incredibly weak, bouncing off the Eastern Ridge repeater," Emily announced, her voice tight with urgency as she pointed to a blinking red dot on the topographical map. David leaned over the console, his heavy brow furrowing as he recognized the coordinates. It was near the old logging sectors, an area currently under a flash flood warning. The radio crackled again, this time with the voice of the regional command center, strictly ordering all rescue personnel to stand down and remain at the station until dawn due to zero visibility and extreme landslide risks. David stared at the blinking red dot, the ghosts of his past failures screaming in his mind, before his jaw set into a hardened line of pure defiance. He wasn't going to let someone die in the dark waiting for sunrise. "Command can sit in their dry offices and read regulations," David growled, his deep voice leaving absolutely no room for debate as he aggressively snatched his heavy, weatherproof parka from the coat rack. "If that signal is coming from the Eastern Ridge, whoever is out there won't survive the night in this temperature. We are going." Emily didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. She had always respected David's moral compass more than standard operating procedures. She swiftly grabbed her heavy tactical backpack, already preloaded with advanced medical gear, flares, and a thermal drone, before following the chief out the back door into the howling tempest. Together, they climbed into the station's modified, heavy-duty, all-terrain rescue vehicle, the massive engine roaring to life as it cut through the darkness. Disobeying direct orders and risking their own careers, David and Emily drove straight into the heart of the storm, unknowingly racing toward a highly trained Navy SEAL, a severely injured woman, and a remarkably brave dog fighting for their lives. Inside the claustrophobic confines of the ruined cabin, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth, splintered pine, and the sharp, metallic tang of blood. John's hands moved with the practiced mechanical efficiency of a seasoned combat medic, his muscular frame hunched protectively over Sarah's trapped leg. He used the tactical trauma shears from his kit to carefully cut away the torn, mud-soaked fabric of her hiking pants, revealing the ugly, deep purple bruising and severe swelling around her tibia, where the secondary wooden beam had pinned her to the floorboards. Despite the freezing ambient temperature, beads of sweat gathered on his forehead as he applied a heavy pressure dressing, his jaw clenched tight in unwavering, laser-focused concentration. Max, the remarkably brave German shepherd who had orchestrated this entire miracle, lay collapsed beside Sarah's shivering torso, his massive chest heaving with utter, debilitating exhaustion. The dog's thick, mud-caked fur was freezing, and his highly intelligent amber eyes drooped from the sheer physical toll of his perilous journey down the mountain. Yet he absolutely refused to rest. With a heart-wrenching, low whimper, Max repeatedly nudged his cold, wet nose against Sarah's palm, his rough tongue rhythmically licking her pale, trembling fingers to anchor her to the waking world, ensuring his beloved owner wouldn't slip into the seductive, deadly void of hypothermia. "Keep looking at me, Sarah. Stay with me, you're doing great," John murmured, his deep, resonant baritone providing a steady, emotional anchor amidst the chaotic symphony of the roaring storm outside. Sarah coughed violently, her emerald eyes fighting the heavy, suffocating pull of unconsciousness, and she reached with a trembling, blood-smeared hand toward the inner waterproof pocket of her heavy jacket. I had to bring them to you, John," she gasped, her voice barely a fragile whisper, struggling over the howling wind. "Michael's things. Before your next deployment." With a supreme, agonizing effort, she pulled out a tightly sealed dark green tactical pouch, pushing it weakly against John's broad chest. Inside lay Michael's heavily worn, leather-bound tactical notebook, a legendary item among their SEAL team, filled with hand-drawn maps, complex operational theories, and his brother's deeply personal musings, alongside a sealed, slightly water-damaged envelope bearing John's name, in Michael's familiar, sharp handwriting.
"He wrote it the night before his last op,"
Sarah breathed, hot tears mixing with the freezing rain streaking across her pale cheeks.
"He said, if anything happened, he wanted you to have his playbook, to keep you safe. I couldn't let you leave without it."
The revelation struck John harder than any physical blow he had ever endured in combat. The crushing, emotional weight of the notebook in his hands momentarily paralyzed him. His overwhelming, suffocating grief violently wrestled with a profound, newfound sense of duty, realizing that his fragile sister-in-law had risked her own life in this deadly tempest solely to deliver his brother's final, protective blessing. Miles below the crushed cabin, the heavy-duty, highly customized all-terrain rescue vehicle violently tore through the rising, treacherous muck of the old mountain logging trail, its massive chained tires spinning and gripping the unstable earth. The vehicle, a formidable beast of reinforced steel grating and blinding high-lumen floodlights, aggressively chewed through the flooded, forgotten path, shaking violently with every deep, hidden rut it encountered. Inside the rattling, cramped cabin, Emily gripped the passenger grab handle, her knuckles stark white, her sharp hazel eyes constantly darting across the flickering thermal radar screen and the topographical GPS on the dashboard. Beside her, David expertly wrestled the heavy power steering wheel, his rugged, weather-beaten face illuminated by the harsh green glow of the instrument panel, completely ignoring the sharp, stabbing pain throbbing in his permanently injured leg. The raging tempest outside showed absolutely no signs of yielding, pounding the windshield with a blinding ferocity that threatened to shatter the thick, reinforced safety glass. Suddenly, David slammed on the heavy hydraulic brakes, the massive rig sliding several feet through the slick mud before coming to a jarring, violent halt. Blocking their path was a massive, seemingly impenetrable barricade of freshly uprooted ancient oaks and thick pine branches, violently twisted together by the surging floodwaters into a deadly wooden dam that completely cut off the only navigable route up the eastern ridge. "We don't have the time to go around," David barked over the roaring diesel engine, aggressively throwing the vehicle into park and kicking his heavy steel door open directly into the blinding torrential downpour. He marched to the rear utility compartment, his heavy, muscular frame moving with a stubborn, defiant agility that completely belied his older age and past physical traumas. He yanked a heavy-duty industrial chainsaw from its secure mount, pulling the starter cord with a vicious yank. The motor roared to life with a deafening, mechanical scream that briefly overpowered the ambient thunder of the storm. Emily was right behind him, swiftly securing the heavy steel winch cable to the front bumper, her bright red hair plastered to her cheeks as she waded fearlessly through knee-deep, freezing, rushing mud. "Chief, hook it to the main structural trunk. I'll pull the tension while you cut the binding branches," she shouted, her highly pragmatic mind instantly calculating the fastest geometric breakdown of the massive barricade. David nodded grimly, plunging the screaming, spinning chainsaw blade directly into the thick, waterlogged timber. A violent spray of sawdust and mud exploded into the air as he physically fought the stubborn wood, his arms straining against the immense, bone-rattling vibration and the biting, paralyzing cold of the Appalachian night. As David aggressively sliced through the final, massive branch holding the chaotic barricade together, Emily sprinted back into the dry cabin to engage the heavy mechanical winch, her sharp eyes suddenly darting to the flashing red alert dominating the regional telemetry monitor. Her heart immediately dropped into the pit of her stomach. "Chief!" Emily screamed out the open window, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. "The hydrological sensors at the Upper Canyon Reservoir. The old concrete dam is showing critical structural microfractures. The water pressure is exceeding maximum load capacity." David yanked the roaring chainsaw free, his chest heaving violently as the massive vehicle winch violently tore the severed heavy tree trunk out of their path, clearing a narrow, dangerously muddy corridor. He knew the terrifying, apocalyptic reality of that specific warning. If the upstream dam fully breached, a catastrophic, unstoppable wall of raging water would instantly wipe out the entire eastern ridge, effectively entombing the trapped SOS sender, his rescue team, and the entire mountainside under millions of gallons of churning mud and debris. With the barricade barely cleared enough to pass, David threw his heavy tools into the back bed, vaulted back into the driver's seat, and slammed the accelerator straight to the floorboard, pushing the massive rescue vehicle far past its safe mechanical limits. The desperate rescue mission was no longer merely a race against the freezing cold. It had violently escalated into a suicidal sprint against an imminent, unstoppable tidal wave. Inside the shattered remnants of the log cabin, the terrifying reality of their situation escalated with violent speed, as freezing, muddy water began steadily seeping through the warped, groaning floorboards. John meticulously secured Michael's heavily weathered tactical pouch inside the waterproof lining of his combat vest, ensuring his late brother's invaluable legacy was protected against the raging elements. Suddenly, the oppressive atmosphere inside the cramped space shifted ominously. Max, who had been resting in a state of near collapse, jolted upright as if struck by an invisible electrical current. The brave German shepherd's ears flattened tightly against his skull, the thick fur along his spine bristled aggressively, and a low, terrifying rumble seemed to vibrate not just through the air, but from the very core of the earth beneath them. Max began barking furiously, a sharp, frantic, commanding sound that was entirely different from his previous pleas for help. The highly trained dog's acute, primal senses had detected the deep, inaudible seismic vibrations of the saturated mountain slope catastrophically losing its structural integrity. Max viciously bit at the heavy fabric of John's tactical jacket, frantically attempting to drag the massive Navy SEAL toward the shattered doorway, urgently signaling that a deadly landslide was merely seconds away. Instantly recognizing the visceral, primal warning in the dog's frantic behavior, John knew there was absolutely no time to hesitate or formulate a complex extraction plan. Utilizing his heavy-duty tactical webbing and reinforced belts, John swiftly fashioned a secure, makeshift harness and hoisted Sarah onto his broad, muscular back. Sarah bit her pale lip, suppressing a sharp scream of pure agony as her severely splinted leg was inevitably jostled. But she fiercely locked her trembling arms around his thick neck, trusting the seasoned soldier with her life. John kicked open the jammed, splintered cabin door, stepping out into the blinding, freezing tempest, just as the floor beneath them began to audibly crack and pitch forward. Max was already out in the torrential downpour, completely ignoring his own profound physical exhaustion, to plunge his snout deep into the churning, treacherous mud. The brilliant canine was actively sniffing out the solid bedrock and stable root systems hidden beneath the shifting sludge, effectively becoming their flawless, living compass. John followed the dog's exact path, his heavy combat boots finding miraculous purchase on the submerged stones that Max deliberately signaled, moving with a desperate, adrenaline-fueled speed up the steep incline. They scrambled up a jagged, rocky embankment just as the mountain behind them let out a deafening, apocalyptic roar that vibrated violently through their chest cavities. John turned his head just in time to witness the sheer, horrifying, unbridled power of nature as the entire hillside simply liquefied and gave way. A massive, churning wall of dark mud, shattered boulders, and wildly thrashing uprooted pines violently obliterated the ancient log cabin, swallowing the structure whole into a violent, unstoppable sea of destruction in a matter of seconds. The immense shockwave of displaced air and debris violently knocked John to his knees, but he fiercely tightened his iron grip on Sarah, shielding her fragile body with his own heavily armored back. If they had remained inside for even 5 seconds longer, they would have been entirely entombed beneath thousands of tons of wet earth. Max barked triumphantly from a stable, elevated granite outcropping a few yards above them, shaking the heavy mud from his coat and urging them to climb higher, successfully leading them away from the newly formed, deadly canyon of destruction, and into the relative safety of the... Meanwhile, several miles down the treacherous slope, David and Emily's desperate race against the clock came to a sudden, violent, and screeching halt. The heavy-duty rescue vehicle violently lurched forward as David slammed both feet on the hydraulic brakes, the massive chained tires skidding uncontrollably through the slick mud before stopping mere inches from a sheer, terrifying drop. The high-beam floodlights illuminated a nightmare scenario. A massive section of the old mountain logging road had been completely washed away by a localized mudslide, leaving a gaping, impassable 60-foot chasm of roaring whitewater rapids. David slammed his heavy fists against the steering wheel in a rare display of raw, unfiltered frustration, the haunting ghosts of his past rescue failures threatening to entirely consume his usually unshakable, hardened resolve. They were completely cut off from the eastern ridge, and with the upstream concrete dam showing critical signs of an imminent catastrophic breach, abandoning the vehicle to walk blindly into the pitch-black storm was a guaranteed immediate death sentence for both of them. Refusing to surrender to the mountain's wrath, Emily leaped into action, her sharp, highly pragmatic mind instantly calculating their only viable technological alternative to locate the stranded survivors. From the rear, waterproof tech compartment of the truck, she carefully retrieved a heavy-weather, military-grade search and rescue drone. The specialized device was a rugged, quad-rotor beast constructed from carbon fiber, specifically engineered to withstand gale-force winds and equipped with a highly advanced forward-looking infrared (FLIR) thermal camera. Stepping bravely out into the biting horizontal rain, she powered up the machine, physically fighting to stabilize it in her hands as the torrential storm actively tried to swat it into the gorge. With fierce, unwavering concentration burning intensely in her sharp hazel eyes, she launched the powerful drone directly into the heart of the tempest, immediately sprinting back into the dry cab to seize the control sticks and monitor the live, flickering video feed on her. The glowing screen inside the dark, rattling cabin initially revealed only a chaotic, swirling mess of dark blue and purple thermal interference caused by the freezing, dense rain. Emily expertly adjusted the frequency filters, pushing the drone higher to clear the violently swaying tree canopy, while simultaneously battling the ferocious, unpredictable crosswinds that threatened to crash the expensive equipment. Suddenly, amidst the cold, dead thermal landscape of the freshly collapsed hillside, a tiny, brilliant cluster of bright orange and red pixels flickered persistently onto the high-definition screen. Emily held her breath, expertly maneuvering the joystick to zoom in on the specific thermal signatures. 3 distinct, glowing shapes clearly emerged against the dark background. A large human silhouette, carrying a medium-sized human, and a smaller, distinctly four-legged figure leading the way across a high ridge. "I have them, Chief. I have a visual." David stared intently at the glowing screen, a fierce, undeniable spark of hope rapidly reigniting in his weathered eyes. They finally had a solid visual on their miraculous survivors, and the fight was far from over. The roaring mudslide below had devoured the cabin, leaving them stranded in a chaotic wilderness of violently whipping branches and blinding horizontal rain. Max, the incredibly resilient German shepherd, refused to falter, his sharp amber eyes scanning the jagged cliff face with instinctual precision. After agonizing minutes of fighting the gale, the dog suddenly darted toward a narrow, obscured fissure carved deeply into the solid granite wall. Max disappeared into the dark opening, letting out a sharp, encouraging bark that echoed over the thunder. John followed the sound, carefully maneuvering his broad shoulders through the tight crevice, and stepped into a surprisingly deep, dry limestone cave. The sudden absence of the howling wind and biting rain was an immediate, staggering relief. John gently lowered Sarah onto a flat, sandy ledge near the back, her slender body trembling violently as the early stages of hypothermia actively threatened to shut down her vital organs. Recognizing that the freezing ambient temperature inside the cavern would still be a death sentence, John's elite Navy SEAL survival training instantly took command of the dire situation. The rugged soldier quickly scavenged the deepest, darkest corners of the cave, locating a modest pile of old, dead branches and dried pine needles that had been blown in months prior. Though the wood was damp from the pervasive humidity, John systematically used his razor-sharp tactical combat knife to expertly shave away the wet outer bark, exposing the crucial, dry heartwood underneath. He carefully arranged a small teepee of the finest wooden shavings, pulling a specialized magnesium fire starter rod from his waterproof survival kit. With a single, forceful strike of steel against the magnesium, a shower of brilliant, white-hot sparks rained down onto the tinder. He blew gently, coaxing the fragile embers until a bright, warm flame suddenly erupted, casting dancing orange shadows across the cold stone walls. The crackling fire brought an immediate, psychological wave of comfort, and John quickly moved Sarah closer to the radiant heat, wrapping his heavy jacket tightly around her shoulders, while Max curled up protectively against her uninjured leg. Several miles down the mountain, the situation inside the stranded rescue vehicle was rapidly deteriorating, as the furious storm actively fought back against Emily's technological lifeline. The advanced thermal drone was heavily buffeted by unpredictable, violent crosswinds, its high-definition camera feed violently shaking as it hovered above the devastated ridge. Emily's fiery red hair was a messy halo around her intensely focused face, her sharp, hazel eyes locked onto the glowing control tablet as she desperately tried to stabilize the struggling quadcopter. The first pale rays of dawn finally pierced through the heavy, lingering mist, signaling the ultimate end of the apocalyptic tempest. But the Appalachian wilderness remained a devastated, unfamiliar battleground. Inside the damp limestone cave, the once comforting fire had burned down to a pile of fragile, white ashes. John's sharp, steel-gray eyes were fixed anxiously on Sarah, whose condition had drastically deteriorated during the long, harrowing night. Her beautifully pale complexion was now flushed with a dangerous, bright red hue, and her slender frame shivered violently as a severe, life-threatening fever rapidly took hold. The deep crush injury on her leg, despite John's expert battlefield dressing, was radiating a terrifying heat, clearly indicating a rapidly spreading bacterial infection. The seasoned Navy SEAL pressed his calloused hand gently against her burning forehead, feeling the chaotic, racing rhythm of her pulse. He knew, with absolute, chilling certainty, that they could no longer afford the luxury of waiting for a mechanized rescue. If they did not reach advanced medical facilities within the next few hours, Michael's brave widow would inevitably succumb to the systemic shock, rendering all their previous, miraculous survival efforts entirely in vain. Moving with urgent, mechanical efficiency, John re-secured his tactical gear, carefully verifying that Michael's invaluable, leather-bound notebook was safely tucked inside his waterproof vest. He hoisted the semi-conscious Sarah onto his broad, muscular back, her weak breath puffing in the crisp morning air, and stepped out of the cavern into the stunning, yet terrifyingly altered landscape. Max, the incredibly loyal German shepherd, followed closely at his heels, his thick black and tan coat matted with dried mud, and his heavy steps betraying a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The trio navigated the treacherous, washed-out slopes, carefully picking their way through uprooted pines and deep, shifting mud pools left behind by the catastrophic landslides. After a grueling hour of descending toward the valley, their desperately needed escape route was violently cut off. What used to be a gentle, ankle-deep mountain creek had been horrifically transformed by the flash floods into a roaring, 60-foot-wide gorge of churning, icy whitewater rapids. The ferocious current violently smashed heavy debris against the jagged rocks, creating a deafening, intimidating roar that seems to actively mock their desperate bid for survival. John carefully lowered Sarah to the muddy ground, his highly trained tactical mind racing as he evaluated the impassable, deadly obstacle. He possessed a 60-foot length of military-grade, high-tensile paracord in his survival kit, but successfully swimming across the violent, freezing rapids to anchor the line while carrying an injured civilian was a physical impossibility, even for an elite SEAL. Before John could formulate an alternative, highly risky strategy, Max stepped forward, his amber eyes locking onto the coiled rope in the soldier's strong hands. The brilliant canine let out a low, determined whine, actively nudging the heavy paracord with his wet snout. John stared at the exhausted animal, recognizing the terrifying yet profoundly courageous offer being made by the devoted guardian. With a heavy heart, John tied a secure, specialized knot around a thick, sturdy piece of driftwood, placing it gently into Max's strong jaws. "You can do this, buddy. Bring it to the other side," John commanded, his voice thick with raw emotion. Without a single second of hesitation, the fearless German shepherd leaped powerfully from the muddy bank, plunging directly into the freezing, violently churning abyss of the flooded river. On the completely opposite side of the treacherous gorge, David and Emily had been hiking relentlessly through the unforgiving, dark wilderness for hours, pushing their physical limits to the absolute breaking point. The veteran ranger's permanently injured leg throbbed with a blinding, white-hot agony, but his rugged, weather-beaten face remained a mask of pure, stubborn defiance, refusing to let the mountain claim another victim on his watch. Emily, covered in thick mountain mud and shivering in her damp tactical gear, constantly monitored the offline GPS tablet, expertly navigating by dead reckoning and terrain association as the morning light slowly illuminated their treacherous path. They broke through a dense thicket of shattered rhododendrons, just as the roaring sound of the raging rapids violently assaulted their ears. Emily raised her hand, instantly signaling a halt, her sharp hazel eyes scanning the churning water below. Suddenly, she gasped loudly, pointing wildly toward the center of the chaotic, freezing torrent, where a dark, struggling shape was violently fighting against the overwhelming, deadly current. Max was entirely submerged by the freezing, powerful waves, his muscular legs kicking frantically as the brutal white water actively tried to drag him down into the deadly, rocky depths. Yet, driven by an unimaginable, unbreakable loyalty to the woman lying on the distant bank, the brave dog fiercely held on to the piece of driftwood, his heavy head breaking the surface just long enough to gasp for precious air. Fighting the immense lateral drift, Max miraculously closed the distance, his sharp claws finally scraping against the submerged, muddy roots of the opposite bank. As he dragged his heavy, freezing body out of the water, completely collapsing onto the solid ground, David and Emily sprinted forward from the tree line. David instantly recognized the tactical paracord trailing from the exhausted dog's mouth.
"Good boy! Let it go! I've got it!"
David shouted, his deep, gravelly voice carrying over the rapids as he swiftly grabbed the rope and immediately looped it twice around the massive, unyielding trunk of an ancient oak tree, effectively securing a crucial, life-saving anchor point. Across the roaring gorge, John watched the two rangers emerge from the dense foliage with a massive, overwhelming surge of profound relief. "Navy SEAL, we have a critical medical emergency, severe crush injury and high fever," John roared across the churning water, utilizing his booming, commanding voice to cut through the deafening ambient noise. David, immediately recognizing the extreme tactical efficiency required, shouted back, "Smoky Mountain Rangers! We are setting up a Z-drag pulley system. Lock your end and prep the patient." The immediate, unspoken synergy between the highly trained military operator and the seasoned veteran wilderness rescuers was beautifully flawless. While John expertly secured his end of the heavy paracord to a deeply rooted boulder, fashioning a secure, makeshift tactical harness for Sarah, David and Emily rapidly deployed their advanced climbing carabiners and heavy-duty friction pulleys from their expedition backpack. Within minutes, they had successfully transformed the simple, single line of rope into a highly tensioned, heavily reinforced mechanical advantage system stretching directly over the deadly rapids. John gently lifted the semi-conscious, burning Sarah, securely clipping her into the improvised harness system. "Hold on, Sarah. You are going home," he whispered gently, before signaling the rangers on the opposite shore. On the far bank, David and Emily planted their heavy boots deep into the mud, pulling the tensioned line with a synchronized, powerful heave. Sarah's suspended body glided smoothly and safely over the terrifying, roaring whitewater, the advanced pulley system effortlessly bearing her weight until David caught her securely in his strong arms. John quickly followed, using a specialized commando crawl to traverse the taut rope with breathtaking athletic speed, completely ignoring the freezing spray lashing at his face. As his heavy combat boots finally hit the solid earth of the safe side, the two disparate rescue teams were finally, miraculously, united. John shared a brief, deeply respectful nod with David, silently acknowledging the incredible combined feat of survival. However, the momentary triumph was immediately shattered as John looked down at the muddy bank. Max, the heroic German shepherd who had orchestrated their entire salvation, lay completely motionless in the freezing mud, his chest barely rising. On the muddy, uneven bank of the roaring gorge, Max, the remarkably brave German shepherd, lay entirely motionless, his powerful muscular frame having finally surrendered to the freezing temperatures and sheer physical exhaustion of his heroic swim. The thick black and tan fur that usually gave him a majestic, commanding appearance was heavily plastered to his shivering ribs, deeply soaked with icy river water and abrasive mountain silt. His amber eyes, usually so sharp and acutely intelligent, were now unfocused and half-closed, staring blankly at the wet earth as his shallow, erratic breaths barely disturbed the mud beneath his dark snout. John immediately dropped to his heavily bruised knees beside the fallen canine, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribcage as he stripped off his soaking tactical gloves. The seasoned Navy SEAL pressed his bare, calloused fingers against the dog's femoral artery, instantly feeling a dangerously faint, thready pulse that was slowing with each passing, agonizing second. Max had given absolutely everything he had to ensure Sarah's survival, pushing his loyal canine body far beyond its natural biological limits. And now his vital organs were rapidly shutting down under the severe, unforgiving grip of acute hypothermia. Refusing to let the mountain claim the noble animal, John swiftly initiated aggressive emergency warming protocols, seamlessly reversing the roles of protector and patient. Remembering exactly how Max had heroically shredded a mattress to insulate Sarah in the crushed cabin, John completely ignored his own freezing discomfort, rapidly shedding his heavy, soaked combat jacket to access the dry thermal layers underneath. David, instantly recognizing the critical situation, quickly rummaged through his heavy-duty expedition backpack and pulled out two specialized, foil-lined Mylar space blankets, tossing them directly to the SEAL. Inside the sprawling, sunlit rehabilitation garden of the State General Hospital, the atmosphere was one of profound healing and quiet triumph. Sarah moved gracefully along the paved stone pathway, her steps remarkably steady and confident, despite the lingering, faint limp that served as the only physical reminder of her horrific crush injury. Her vibrant auburn hair, once plastered with freezing mud, now caught the bright sunlight, framing a healthy, warmly flushed complexion that radiated an unbreakable inner strength. The fierce independence and quiet elegance that defined her spirit had fully returned, entirely banishing the pale, shivering specter of the woman trapped in the ruined cabin. Approaching her from the shaded portico was John, striking an imposing, immaculate figure in his crisp, impeccably tailored Navy service dress blue uniform. The gleaming golden anchors and rows of colorful ribbons on his broad chest reflected a lifetime of dedicated service. But it was the profound calmness in his piercing steel-gray eyes that truly marked his ultimate psychological transformation. John offered Sarah a gentle, deeply affectionate smile as they sat together on a polished wooden bench beneath a blooming cherry blossom tree. Reaching into the inner pocket of his dress uniform, he carefully withdrew Michael's heavily weathered, leather-bound tactical notebook, the precious, invaluable legacy that had nearly cost Sarah and Max their lives to deliver. John slowly traced the rough, water-stained edges of the pages before opening it to his late brother's final, deeply personal entry. Michael had written extensively about the intricate balance between the heavy burdens of warfare and the sacred, absolute necessity of protecting the fragile beauty of the lives left behind. As John read the familiar, sharp handwriting aloud, the suffocating, paralyzing guilt that had haunted him for months entirely dissolved into the warm afternoon breeze. He finally understood that Michael's tragic death was not a failure of John's protection, but a harsh reality of their dangerous profession, and that carrying forward his brother's wisdom was the truest form of honor. John closed the notebook with a profound, quiet reverence, his deeply scarred soul finally finding the elusive, absolute peace and unwavering resolve required for his upcoming, highly classified, sealed deployment.
Sometimes, God's miracles don't come as a parted sea, but as a loyal dog in the pouring rain, or a stranger who refuses to leave you behind. In our daily storms, whether we are facing deep grief, sudden hardship, or fear, remember that God always sends unexpected angels to guide us safely through the darkest nights. His grace lives inside the love and courage of those around us. If this story touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. May God bless you and your loved ones always.